The space lanes were a surprise to find to everybody. However, in basic terms, just as there are ley lines on Earth and every other planet, there is a type of ley line structure in space that circulates throughout the entire universe. These space lanes allow for very efficient FTL travel, but only to certain systems, the ones that are close to these space lanes themselves. All other species that aren't close to these space lanes need to find some sort of way in order to travel, to reach out. To this end, most opt for what's known as warp speed. However, this is basically just traveling by creating their own artificial space lane, however temporarily. This severely limits the maneuverability while doing so, but it does work, as this warp speed can only be used for so long and is not nearly as fast as an actual space lane. Having travel focused is a double-edged sword in this case. Those that are close to the space lanes are prone to invasion, so much so that several species have been bombed back to the Bronze Age more than once. And because of this, they make the perfect slaves because they can easily be picked up by those whose technology is still intact. About half do fight back, however, it is almost always a losing gambit when you're facing forces like that. All they can do is make it as non-profitable as possible by taking out ships, taking out personnel, in any way to make sure that these things don't come back to take them. On the other side of that sword, many planets near the space lanes do capitalize on it. Entire species are action-packed with space stations, cargo ships, space elevators, and their own personal defense fleet. It is in fact a true sight to behold when they're able to use the space lanes for their own benefit. This is a time of great expansion when the space lanes are being mapped out. Each of these wealthy species constantly trying to get an advantage on each other, mostly by commerce and diplomacy, yet others' force of arms is the only course of action, and they will take it very, very well. The strongest of these is the Welthard Empire, using their state-focused religion to build up a massive armada in secret, making sure that everyone stays tight-lipped, as they would end up killing anyone who even spoke about it. Then, without a warning or even provocation, they would overwhelm and subdue their neighboring species and systems, taking everyone before most species even noticed they had taken control over the largest piece of the universe that anyone could have expected, and everyone looked at them with awe. How could they do this? Far away from the space lanes, a barely known species at the time had reached into the stars after their great awakening. It is a sudden flood of knowledge and understanding that end most species, as they would end up destroying themselves during this. However, for this species, known as humans, they just seemed to watch everything. They focused and they learned with great interest. They watched, they listened, and they understood what was happening, as they have seen this before. Yet their territory was far outside the space lanes, a very difficult area to reach with the best of ships at the best of times, yet the gravitational issues when traveling, the electromagnetic hazards that are seemingly everywhere, the random deadly debris that seems to come out of nowhere, does not worry anyone as much as meeting the residents of this territory. Reason being, these humans, well, they have a reputation. They have not been seen much, but they're known for their extremely dense musculature, their ability to adapt to any situation, their military technology that seem to permeate their culture, and their complete unpredictability. Despite their clear interest in logic and reason, they are a duality in nature. It is believed that these creatures because they are more military based than anything else, will only respond to a show of strength. So the Weltard Empire sends a very small battle group in to speak with the humans. At its head, a large cruiser with enough firepower to destroy half a continent if it needed to. Upon reaching the Athens sector, which is one right next to the Sol sector on the outskirts of human territory, the delegation began to demand to speak with the Emperor of Humans. When they were informed there was no such thing, they were confused. They believed that somebody was playing a trick on them. The delegation began asking who is the leader of the species. They got nowhere fast. Every time they asked for the one who is in charge of the entire human race, the entire human species, they were just never getting anywhere and always got more and more questions. Irritated, the leader of the delegation, which was a reptilian with a strange carapace on its back, rotated both its chameleon-like eyes forward, locking onto the screen. This was a sign of frustration. They then received coordinates towards the fourth planet in this sector. They were told to head in that direction. He thought to himself, finally, we're getting somewhere. Reaching the coordinates near the planet, the delegate leader almost jumped backwards as a holographic human was shown in front of him, actually seeming to come out of the monitors. It was strange. The delegation leader looked forward and saw this tall, fit man as it stood calmly, and asked him the reason for his visit. The delegation spoke through gritted teeth as they were still frustrated with the way they'd been treated, and he explained how strong the Weltard Empire is, spoke about how vast they are, and how vastly skilled they are, even against someone like humans. They claim that the Weltard forces will be making their way across the known universe, and everything will soon fall under their authority. If humans and humanity does not want their species completely subjugated, their territory plundered, they can surrender and be, well, not quite a vassal state. They would be less than a vassal state. Or they could choose to fight and face a military far superior to them, and then humanity would be nothing more than a footnote in history and a species in chains. The human standing there in the hologram looked confused, and before he could even speak, a human female's voice could be heard in the background saying something just loud enough so everyone can hear, saying how whips and chains can be exciting, but humanity would never allow themselves to be placed in bondage. The delegate leader swatted their tail and seemed to scoff at the idea of somebody saying something like that, started to scream how the opinions of a female were completely useless, claiming that she would be the first one to submit, and she would be glad of it, as she would be under his yoke. That is when the human commander no longer looked confused at what to say. He stared directly into the delegate leader's eyes and said, "You insult our warriors. You insult our women. You threaten our people with slavery and death. There's only one answer your terroristic claims will receive." That is the moment the holographic image of the human disappeared, and in that moment, alarms began to start blaring inside every single one of the delegate ships. From all sides, human ships began to launch missiles, torpedoes, rotating turrets, and firing, followed up shortly by the fixed keel-mounted weapons of the ships. The delegate ships, to their credit, launched countermeasures and defended with point defense weapons as fast as they could. This works mostly for the missiles, as the missiles are not armored, which means the point defense systems can take them down. The shields that they were using, the different countermeasures, can actually deflect some of the blast along with taking some of the hull. However, the armored torpedoes take many hits before they will actually be either deflected or destroyed, yet this was not what they need to worry about. They truly should be worried about the solid munitions and energy weapons that were beginning to tear through the armor of their ships, including the cruiser, like they're nothing more than tissue paper. In barely 3 minutes, all delegation ships are adrift. Salvage teams are sent out with one simple command. We want their memory cores, their hard drives. I want to know what the hell these guys are up to. 9 months later, the Weltard are on the war march again, pushing towards the galactic west. Their march across the territory brings nothing but sorrow, suffering, and death to all they reach, regardless if they surrender or not. Utilizing the space lanes, they can move their vast armada through the lanes and flood any system with ships in a matter of just a few days. Yet, they find an issue. Their scouting ships suddenly stop transmitting in one direction. Not one ship, but all of them. Another group is sent, but is lost quickly after entering the space lane. Utilizing the old warp tech, so rarely used now that almost no ship carries it anymore, they use it to slowly approach the area where the scouts were lost. Along the way, they find the remnants of scout ships, all torn to pieces, just nothing but worthless hulks of metal floating through space. As they reach the system of issue, they can scan the space lanes and see that human ships are laying mines across the space lanes. Rows and rows of height, width, and depths of hundreds of mines thick are just everywhere. Even the largest ship in the fleet, if it crashed into this, would be torn asunder. They can't understand what's going on. As they approach, the Weltard Group Commander calls out demanding for the immediate halt of the minefield, yet no one seems to take his orders. They demand that the commander of the fleet laying the mines announce themselves and face judgment under the authority of the Emperor of the Weltard. With no response, the approaching Weltard ships prime their weapons. If they're not going to listen, we'll just have to shoot them. Yet before they can fire, without a word, the human ships immediately turn and fire on the Weltard ships. "How dare you!" the Weltard commander screams into the comm system as his ship is struck, forcing him to fly across the room. The only thing he gets back is from one of the ships that says, "You bet your ass we dare." The Weltards, to their credit, had not approached without realizing that they need to make sure that the message got out. They had sent back the message live, yet due to the travel time it would still be some time before the message actually reached their fleet. However, when it does, the Emperor is furious at the defiance of whatever species this was. He didn't even care at this. Under the word of the advisors, they noticed something about the placement of the mines. They brought this to the Emperor, and they noticed that the mines were placed too far back. This leaves an opening for humans to still use the space lane, but since it allows ships to slip into the space lane, it means that they can slip out of it right before the mines. 2 months after the first encounter with the humans in the minefield, the First Fleet headed down the space lanes. Aboard the human ships, everyone can see the enemy approaching. It's very easy to see. Their energy signature just blares, and everyone immediately prepares all the weapons, realizing that in this moment, as they look, they realize that history may not repeat, but it sure does rhyme. Looking around the battlefield, the human ships get in a strange spindle formation that seems to be almost like half of a globe, so that they will completely envelop the ships as they exit the space lanes. Since you can only exit at certain points, which is between space lanes and the closest planetary body, they know exactly where the enemy will be emerging. Like clockwork, the enemy arrived with weapons ready, and like clockwork, the human ships engaged and tore the enemy ships to pieces with mines, rockets, cannons, missiles, torpedoes, turret ballistics, and energy weapons, along with the fixed keel mounted weapons. It was an absolute slaughter. The enemy vessels all pushed in, trying to maneuver and shoot, only to find themselves trying to dodge the hulks of their fallen while trying not to be targeted by the ruthlessly efficient humans. The battle that was supposed to be a glorious victory for the Weltards turned into a crushing defeat that only lasted 7.8 human hours, with not a single human loss. Just over a day later, a message comes in from the Weltard Emperor. Calmly, he mentions how well the humans have done, to the point of even mentioning how the humans have covered for their less combat-focused allies that had joined the battle. The Emperor mentions how perhaps there is more they can share with each other's culture. At this point, one of the captains chimed in and says, "Yeah, we've been sharing our culture with you all day." The Emperor found this very amusing. However, the Emperor also began to make offers. Offers that were so wonderful, only an insane cretin would have refused. Yet in response, the one in charge of the human battle group says, "Offers too good to be true usually are. Besides, we humans have a very strong protective instinct. You should know this. Not only do we protect our territory, but our families waiting for us. They're waiting for us back there, behind us. Our allies to our side, we protect them too. And even our new friends on that planet down below right there. Once looked at as nothing more than a slave species because, well, I got to admit they look very nice. Now, with just a little bit of human help, they will soon be able to face off your entire force on their own, especially since the skill level of what you've sent us so far has been amateurish at best." The Emperor, at this point, is beyond displeased at the sheer act of defiance. The Emperor begins ranting, raising his voice more and more until he's actually screaming about how he will burn every human planet to glass and enslave all those who stand with humanity. In response, the human captain turned, realized that he had heard something, and then turned back to the Emperor, and before leaving, he sent this message: "Bring it on, bitch." Once translated, this prompted the entire Weltard armada to be mobilized. So many ships that all the signals that were coming down the space lane seemed to merge together, so much so you couldn't get an accurate count, not even close. Yet there was one count that can be done. The space lane is only a certain diameter, which means only a certain amount of ships can come down at a time. They also need to have a certain distance between each other, even though the sensors can't differentiate between it. It is there, which means there's only going to be a certain amount of ships coming out of the space lane at a time, which means that numbers, even an armada this large that seems to make the entire space lane glow with the amount of ships that are in it, will still be a simple battle of skill, not truly attrition. Yet, seeing this, the human sailors seem to steel themselves, all becoming stone-faced, focusing on their job, getting ready for the fight ahead as every single weapon, every circuit on their ship is prepared. And as the fight begins, that narrow corridor where numbers count for nothing, space burns. As before, the human ships begin to penetrate any and every enemy ship that enters normal space. With the distance and travel time, it gives the enemy crews just enough time to know who punched their ticket due to being completely pierced by one of the ballistic rounds, or simply exploded or splashed by something penetrating deep and then blowing up. The first waves go down very easy. Yes, the constant buildup of debris turns out to be enough to give the enemies just a little bit of an opening. That is, if they have a helmsman with a little bit of skill, some determination, or just sheer luck, they're able to dodge a few shots or hide behind the debris before human ships can make the actual kill shot. Eventually, the enemy is able to effectively return fire as they're able to get behind something, anything, to make sure they don't get hit first. This, combined with ammunition beginning to run low, is making things difficult at best. As the enemy fleet is pushing through the dead hulks of destroyed ships, they begin to make headway. The Allied ships, being nervous, begin to pull back, yet the human ships order them to stay in formation as the formation is keeping them alive and not letting them know that they're about to get one of the best feelings that was ever going to happen in their life. As the situation becomes dire, notices are sent throughout the human fleet, and then all the humans, every single one, begins to smile, because there's nothing like having your friends show up with lots of guns. In that moment, the fleets of humanity arrive, jumping into the system and immediately begin to take up position. The admiral of the combined human fleets sent out a message saying, "Sorry we're late. Traffic was a bitch." This actually shocked everyone, enemy and ally alike, as they had no idea that humanity would do something like this. They believed everyone would come in from the space lanes, but to do that, they had to be out on the other side of the minefield. How could they simply just jump in? They didn't realize that humanity, their home system, is nowhere near a space lane, and warp travel is hardly safe in the Sol sector. So they opted for jump drives. Utilizing a dual quantum singularity drive, they can basically teleport vast distances in an instant. Yet, this technology does have its limits, and they do have to reach only certain distances before they have to stop and let the engines cool, which is what takes so long for them to travel. In spite of a few ships actually glowing hot, hundreds of human military and civilian ships move in to reinforce the lines, wrapping up the area around where the Weltards are coming out of the space lanes. As the Titan-class ships arrive, carrying the Emperor, he's expecting a few hundred human ships to be either destroyed or just adrift in space, maybe one or two able to fight. Instead, as his kingship comes out, he realizes he faces an armada equal to his original armada. However, he only has the one Titan class. Now, he faces two Titan class dreadnoughts with over 50 actual dreadnought class vessels, with over 100 different battleships and hundreds of destroyers and frigates and corvettes that seemed to fill up the gap. So many ships that no matter which way he looked, he realized he's surrounded, and they are in perfect firing position. The Emperor, with a shaking hand, reached down to the comms, pressed the hailing frequency, and said, "Maybe we can negotiate." But the words are cut short as the human armada laid into the Emperor's moon-sized ship, its heavy armor and energy shields doing very little to protect it. The Emperor died that day as a ballistic spike punctured into the bridge, sucking the Emperor off to the side, and once stuck to the small hole, he stayed there for a moment, even though he had pressure and it wasn't comfortable. He thought for that moment maybe someone could get there, pull him away, and he would survive. That is, until the bulkhead door on the far side opened as one of his own came in to tell him something. This allowed for even more pressure, as it seemed like it was enough to pull his own subordinate off their feet and almost slam into him. The Emperor was then pulled slowly over the course of a minute and a half through a crack no larger than the size of an ink pen. After the battle, the Empire very quickly dissolved into warlords fighting over the scraps of the empire and tearing apart what they had to pieces. They also had the populace fighting for their own freedom, realizing that the emperor and his armada was gone, and a bipedal species called humans, always ready to return homeworlds to their rightful species, and if anybody had anything to say to it, well, they would answer with their own guns. Eventually, the fighting slowed down to pretty much nothing, and at that point, some of the species wanted to form a new order, an order to stop wars between species from happening again. Perhaps a peace through treaties, they said at one point. Humans always stop them there, always raising one hand, wanting to speak, and then saying, "We tried that before. It just leads to bigger wars." The humans never did sign any actual treaties, non-aggression pacts for those who bordered their territory, but that was about it. Instead, they did opt for space stations to be set up along the space lanes themselves. These are set up primarily for commerce, but also a bit of diplomacy if need be. It is of note at this point, outside human territory, this is the only place to find a human. If one is able to sit and speak with a human, one will find out that they are all students of history, not just their own, but every single species. Whatever history they can find, they just want the God's honest truth. And they'll digest it. They may not like it, but they will deal with it. And perhaps, if you're lucky, they will tell you how they knew that 300 ships would be able to hold off a gigantic horde. Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you for joining me today on this short story. Now before I go, I need to send out a congratulations on the latest winner of our contest, and that will be Erica Gem. I also need to send out a great big thank you to the supporters of this channel, and those will be Sir, Prozac and Pancakes, Brian Kemp, MTF Guard, Erica Gem, SS Demon, and Julius Boone. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, punching out.